Hello, hello, hello. It's Jeremy Greider, the e-commerce redneck, and we have on our Culture Cast episode today one of my good friends from last 3 or 4 years now, I guess. Marc Wendt. He is an extraordinary human. He's been involved with some really cool stuff, and I just wanted to do an interview and kind of share him with my world and his good advice. He's one of the most level-headed guys I've ever met. So without further ado, Marc, how are you doing, sir?
Right now, I'm feeling really warm and excited.
Well, appreciate you, man. You've had a huge impact on my life and just the way I approach everything from confrontation to just other people. And you truly, I can say this, you truly live your life in a way that I think has humankind just always at the forefront, like thinking of humanity first. And I can appreciate that in your approach. But with that said, have you ever done anything in e-commerce? I got to ask you, is there anything in the e-commerce world you've been involved with?
I think to answer that question, I would have to clarify the definition of e-commerce, but the way I define it, I would say yes. And what I'm selling is me, right? Because I'm an executive coach. And the main way that I do that is very similar to this conversation. I work in my office with clients via Zoom or whatever particular conference software we need to work with. And the selling part is about me going out and developing leads and creating relationships with people who want what I have. Additionally, as a musician, I've done e-commerce through the different recordings that I've launched on something called TuneCore.
Okay. Yeah.
And, I'm old enough to have had a MySpace page. Right. So
me too.
Those things. And then I've had relationships with companies that I've been part of where they had branches that dealt with e-commerce. And at the time, e-commerce was an emergent thing because it was the early 2000s. So I would say limited experience with it. Yeah.
But you haven't had limited experience with technology, because what really cool archive type software, website, whatever you want to call it, were you involved with? Because this is pretty cool.
Well, there's a company called the Internet Archive, and I worked for them for 2 years, helping them. Well, my title was Manager of Physical Archives. And so what we did during that time frame was we took all of the physical objects in the storage containers in the physical archive, and we created a system that helped us track what had been scanned and what hadn't been scanned, and who the donors were, and all of the various important aspects of the metadata, so that as it went from the storage location to the scanning facilities and then came back to the storage location, all of that was trackable in a way that worked within the Internet Archive systems of tracking. And that was mostly a physical problem. It was about 70% physical and 30% technological. And it's interesting because the level of, quote, commerce that goes on at the Internet Archive is that they believe in this idea of all access to human knowledge for free. Right. So they have over 4 million books scanned, and they have tens of thousands of films. I think you can watch every Charlie Chaplin film there for free. It's a really powerful place.
I didn't know that. I've got to check that out now.
Yeah, it's archive.org, digital librarians. And if you can, while I've got everyone listening, if you go there, please donate, because it's not a big company. There's not a huge amount of money behind them. And what they do is really amazing. Like you could save yourself Netflix and spend the next 5 years there learning stuff without spending a dime, really. So that, and then, where I learned about archiving was in the concert industry. A guy named Bill Graham. Many people may know Bill Graham started concert promotion in the 60s in the Bay Area. And then he was one of the first folks to produce a world tour, and that was with the Rolling Stones. So Bill basically started the idea of world tours in the rock and roll arena. This is after the Beatles, which wasn't quite a world tour in the way we understand it now. But I worked as an intern for him in his archives, and I learned about storage and retrieval and maintenance and all of those things. Then I went on to work for another amazing company called Lucasfilm, and so I was the licensing archivist, or supervisor of archive services was my actual title. And I worked there for 21 years.
Wow. Wow. And it's funny. I was just going to say there's a lot of people that call themselves coaches, but it's funny with you actually make a living being a coach. You don't just say you're a coach, you're out there doing it. And I would have to say you are what I would call a true coach. And what I mean by that is a lot of people call themselves coach as an alternate word to consultant. But the way you approach people is so thoughtful and it encompasses what's going on. I truly see you as one of the maybe few actual coaches, people that really kind of, because when you think about it, even like, football, college football, it really, when you're dealing with kids at that age, it's a lot about helping build the man too, and if you do a good job of that, you get a lot of good qualities that come in. And so I kind of feel like a coach is a little more than just do this and you're going to be successful. It's a thoughtfulness around it. And I mean, to me, you really, that's you to a T is being not just self-aware, but aware of others and what's going on with them. And that's pretty cool.
Well, this is the second time that you've acknowledged how you see me, and I really appreciate that. But I also want to just give back a little bit because you show up in my life as a fierce advocate for the things that you're passionate about. And it's clear that you have a huge heart and that you love music and that you love the idea of people creating their own results in life, which I think is a classic American value. And I think we share that, this idea of not just capitalism, but free enterprise. Free enterprise, meaning I can create something that's unique to me and I can bring it to the world in the way that the world is fed. And as a result of the powerful thing that I create, I also am fed. And I think that's a really powerful archetype for the way that American culture works. And we could really use a lot more folks looking to create stuff as opposed to get on someone else's bandwagon. In fact, I think the way things are going, we're all going to be called into perseverance and production of our own and less on centralized jobs.
Yeah, the whole world's changed in the last 5 years. The job market's changed, the way people view a job, the amount of people working for themselves, it's insane. But yeah, I am avid about creating your own destiny. And I do feel that, with you, we definitely sync on that, man.
One of the things that was on the walls a lot at Lucasfilm were paintings of pioneers.
Really?
People on horses and in wagons making their way across the great United States. And when you think about it, pioneer we often think of as the same as innovator, but it's also being out there in the middle of nowhere and figuring out, okay, where's the water, where's the food, where's the shelter, where's the fire, is a very primal kind of thing. And so in that sense, it's an archetype for people to get out there. And in the modern day version, we have the digital nomads, right? Who are out there in their vans, cruising around and making things happen. And I like to think of that as like an element of human endeavor that's never going to go away. Like we're always going to be like just getting that stuff done and beyond.
Yeah, you definitely gotta keep pushing. That pioneering spirit too is more than just innovation. Yeah, it is. It's putting yourself out there. It's putting the feet to what you're saying and putting a little faith behind it, and just believing in yourself. And what's really cool, Mark? The person who actually influenced me to have a little confidence, his name's Mark as well, but M-A-R-K. And it was as simple as I was flunking out of my first semester in private Bible college. And it's because I was chasing girls and being young and, stupid. And I realized I was being stupid, but I was having to pay for it. So I went to my friend. I was like, can you teach me or not teach me, tutor me? And he goes, absolutely. And so he goes, bring me your work. And I brought him my work and he looks at it and he goes, you don't need somebody to tutor you. You just need confidence. This is excellent. And from that point forward, I just started pushing and pushing and pushing. And I, ended the semester at 3.0 from failing And then the next semester was a 4.0, and I kept it between a 3.7 and a 4.0 for the rest of my college career. And it's because I actually realized that I could use my mind, that I wasn't an idiot. And somebody put a little confidence in me. And I have since then, and I kind of see you as this kind of person too, always looking to try to inspire somebody that way or help them have a little faith in themselves. Any thoughts about that? Sorry,
Well,
I've been
yeah,
talking.
because no, I love it. We all benefit when we individually, each of us find the fire that gets us going. And one of the things you said about my coaching style is pertinent here because I actually don't come in with a program and a cookie cutter kind of approach to people. My foundational premise is that my job is to remind people of who they really are underneath it. And then when you connect people back up to their own resources, their own imagination, their own fire of desire, it propels them to do the thing, the mission, vision, purpose that they're unique bringing to the planet. And so my premise isn't that you're broken. My premise is that you're actually just fine. We just have to remind you of the things you forgot about yourself. And so much like your mentor did, you just needed someone to go, yeah, you this and this and this, and just actually do the work. And the way to get 10,000 hours of experience is to start with one.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's funny, the whole thing that got me into designing, which got me into e-commerce, was I needed my own marketing materials when I was in the long-term care pharmacy world. But, when I started, I didn't have any real experience. I'd painted and sketched. I'd won some awards like that, but I didn't know digital art. And I can't tell you how many hours I just sat there on the couch with the belief that I could get where I wanted to be. And a couple of years later, I had a full-time job as the head web designer and sales guy. It was a split job, but man, I got into the industry, and within 2 years, I was the VP of creative of that company. And so I absolutely believe that. And there's so much information out there, like the Internet Archives, but also, Wiki. I didn't realize how important Wiki was at sharing information. It was, for the first time, really a total compiling of all the known information possible. I mean, and now we have AI extracting beyond that. Mind's blown.
Well, XAI is about to launch Grokpedia, which is based on Wikipedia, but it's going to have XAI's bandwidth, XAI's power, and their ethic, I guess, is the way to put it. Say what you will about it. They're aiming at what they call the truth, right? Which is this idea behind, free speech. Let people make up their own minds. Just give us the facts, right? So I think Grokpedia, for lack of a better term, I think they've got a sexier name than that. But anyway, I think that's a good thing. Like, yeah, maybe it's redundant. Wikipedia does a great job. There's a lot of amazing resources there. But at the same time, it's like when I heard they were doing this, I got excited because I'm like, oh, there might even be more that's available. And I might even be able to talk to it instead of have to look at it, right? And type to it, which excites me. I also wanted to say something about your story when you talked about how you just sat down with the computer and you said, I'm going to figure this out. And you had the belief that you could. One of my favorite axioms that I wrote is the first step in solving what seems to be an impossible problem is the creation of the belief that a solution can be found. So the very first step is this identification with, well, there's a will, there's a way, right? And so that just throughout history, we see that as the key differentiator, right? We got Edison with the light bulb, and we just Tesla with alternating current. It just goes on and on and on. And it comes down to this fundamental thing of, well, this seems impossible, but I think I can find a way. And then from that, you build.
Right. Right. And even more now than ever with AI, Chat GPT, Grok, all these things, I feel like the information's there. And for the longest time, especially, I'm very neurodivergent in that I have ADHD and probably a whole litany of other things. I type words backwards, so I may be dyslexic. I don't know. I think that information is just, the beauty of it is it's so available. If you want something, there's no gates anymore for the most part. It's not just behind the institution walls that have the big libraries that you're sitting drilling through this stuff. And, one of my favorite things is to take Chat GPT and kind of program it to think a certain way in one of the folders, and then, use it with, and I get in there and talk to it, and it talks back and forth, and like I adjust things, and man, I even if you're an audio visual learner like I am, it's an incredible way to learn, and
It's
experiment.
interesting to me. Yeah, I agree.
always ask for links, though.
It gives you links?
Yeah, it'll give you links if you have the paid version. It'll give you.
Okay, I've
give you
never even
links.
asked. And a link to what? Like a link to its resource?
Just to verify the source. I think
Got it,
that's
yeah.
important too with that.
Yeah, because otherwise you're just hallucinating,
Right.
right? You have no idea. It's like a 12-year-old that's like, yeah, I got the answer for that.
I heard it at school.
Right, exactly.
I will say the hallucinations are pretty good. I used Grok this morning, actually. I was trying to get it to say something, but instead the logo just goes like that. It looks at its arm, and I have this big arm on the video. I was dying. I was like, that's the funniest hallucination. I did not tell it to do that.
It's hilarious. Man, when I was thinking about this conversation, I'm thinking about music and thinking about this kind of thing because, my podcast is called Moped Outlaws. And I think there's a kind of outlaw spirit that goes with the pioneering spirit and being someone, like you said, neurodivergent. And we got these letters, ADHD, whatever, autism, all these things. And right now, the context for a lot of that is as if somehow that's bad or you're not quite right. But human evolution has had where we create these outliers. There's this thing that happens and there's this new thing that shows up. And the people that are quote unquote normies are like, that makes me uncomfortable, right? But we don't know that that's not an added value, that having that thing that we are labeling the way we're labeling it isn't some sort of evolutionary step forward. And so I think of this idea of outliers, of people who break out of the norm and find new ways of doing things and new ways of creating things as something to celebrate. And in particular, I remembered this story that I want to tell you. And this is a music story.
Awesome.
And it's a bit of an, I'm a boomer. So for those of you that were born after 2000, you may not be able to relate to this, but here it is.
You're not a Gen Xer?
No, I'm a boomer.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah, 63.
I didn't know that. I thought you were maybe 70, at 70. I did not realize that. Well, yeah. You're looking good, brother.
Doing good. Yeah. Yeah. So the story I want to tell is about being 14 and being asked if I want to go to this concert. And I'm like, totally. And so me and my buddy who's also 14 get in this old Ford Bronco with a couple who take us to this concert. And as we're getting closer to the concert, the guy decides that he can see the concert hall off the highway. And just remember, this is like 1976.
That was the year I was born.
He rolls off the regular freeway and out into the hinterlands past that and rolls up the hill and pops up right backstage, right? Literally next to the buses, right? And so we're rolling up to this thing and yeah, that's causing a stir. But at the same time, it's like, dude, like that was quite the move, right? So the concert was something called The Outlaws with Waylon Jennings, Willie Nelson, Tom Paul Glacier, and Jesse Coulter, right? And that album itself, if you've never heard the Outlaws album, just go right now and find it. It is some great music, and each of these people is presented individually in the way that they present things. And it also marks something in the history of country music, which I really think is great, which is the outlaw movement, where they moved away from the traditional sort of RCA dominated country music approach to things. And they created a whole new kind of wild side to country music. And so here I am, 14. I've been playing guitar maybe 2 years and I'm exposed to this. And I'm like, oh my God. And we illegitimately drove like pirates backstage.
That's
now
too
we didn't
good.
get to meet anybody. We got booted, right? But the car was still there. Like there was like, all right, you can leave the car here, but you're going over here. Like, so they bum rushed us out of there. But man, I'll never forget that. That was a place in California called the Concord Pavilion. And that was a great band.
Hope they fix that. Otherwise, we just gave everybody the hack.
No, you can't do that anymore. No way.
You know, it's funny you mentioned Waylon Jennings because he's from the same hometown that my mom and my grandparents and my great-grandparents are from, Littlefield, Texas. And I've got a little story about Waylon Jennings because
Love to hear it.
If you look on Wikipedia, you'll see that he got his start on radio. What they don't tell you is he got his start with I don't know if it was called like the Bundick Brothers Band or whatever. It was my grandpa's cousins, and they had a band they played on the radio, and little old Waylon wanted to play, so they let him on, but they turned him all the way down. But he started getting better and better and better and better and better, and he took over as they turned him up. And so that's the story you don't hear, but Waylon comes from kind of the same people, same little small town type of people that I come from, and I've always liked Waylon and Willie and the boys, and
yeah,
that record, you're right, is phenomenal. I believe I have it in the other room if I'm not wrong, but yeah, I love outlaw country.
Right, and the idea is when you're way out there, you don't know who you really are or what you might know who you are, but you may not know your value.
Right.
And in e-commerce, sometimes that flavor that's just out there somewhere in a small town in Texas or in Georgia or wherever you're from, Montana, you bring a perspective that might not look what your TV looks like.
Right.
But you are something valuable. You are presenting something that's hard-won from your own life experience. And I love that. That just ties right into this whole idea of, free enterprise and commerce, because, when those people went out there and pretty soon you had a town, and I mean like 2 buildings and 30 people maybe, and a bunch of tents, they had to figure out, well, who knows how to smith and shoe a horse, and who knows how to cook and all of those things, right? So you get to define for yourself what your role is. You don't have to go fit into somebody's cookie cutter version of it. And in fact, the world actually needs you to invent that thing from the ground up, because we're always looking for an improvement, an evolution, a better way of doing it. And so by finding that part of yourself, getting connected to that part of yourself, and then having the perseverance and the tenacity to get through the mud or the challenge of it, it's so important, not just for you and what you receive out of it, for everybody else that needs to be reminded.
It's funny, and I think this kind of plays into this. Where did you grow up, Mark? What neighborhood did you grow up in? I think this is great, by the way.
I grew up in Berkeley, California. Yeah. My parents, well, first of all, my father's family's from Montana. My mom was an Air Force brat, so they weren't from anywhere.
Right.
But they met in Colorado when my dad was in the Air Force Academy. They made me, and that changed everything. And they decided when I was 6 years old to move out to the Bay Area in California because they wanted to be part of the 60s revolution thing. And so I came up in the most permissive environment I've ever seen in the in the history of America. Like the things we were up to as kids were pretty wild, and everybody was experimenting. And like one of the interesting things about me, and I think this makes me a good heart-centered coach, because you described, one of our things that's heart-centered is, my parents were telling me from the days I was 6, 7 years old, it's okay for boys to have feelings. And they taught me how to have feelings. And I learned the language of emotional intelligence early in life, and it became part of how I operated. But when I got to high school and I got around a little bit more testosterone, both myself and other folks, it wasn't what I expected. The whole dream of the 60s didn't really come true in society in the way that the people that I was living around thought it was supposed to. And we've been kind of grappling with that a little bit ever since, like this idealized version of the world. And then there's the resistance to that idealized version of the world. And somewhere in the middle is this best for everybody kind of idea. And the principles of liberty, emotional intelligence, free enterprise, innovation, productivity, those things have been instilled in me as a result of my life. And having had, the hardships of people who decided to drop out. Like my dad quit his job. He passed the bar in 2 states and said, no, I'm not going to practice law. And the reason is because he was clerking in a Supreme Court justice's office. And he witnessed something that put him off the law forever, which was that the defense attorney and the prosecuting attorney came into the judge's chambers while he was putting in some books, and they made a deal outside of the jury. And that really wrecked him. And so he couldn't handle that. And so we moved to California, and he gave up, basically, which was horrible for my mom. And that didn't last long. They didn't last long together. And so there I was, 10 years old, the man of the house, as they say, right? My dad was still around, and dude was smart. And he never abandoned us. Like, he didn't see us, but he didn't work and make money. He was a perpetual philosopher and student of life. And so because I had this gap with my own father figure of like, I really want something from him, I really, really invested more and more in trying to understand how would you do this? Why would you make that kind of decision? And so he took me on a lifelong journey of understanding the philosophers and history and spiritualism. And, he was a theologian before he got out of high school. He was supposed to go to a Jesuit college.
Wow.
But he ended up going in the Air Force Academy.
Wouldn't have happened.
Like, here's the thing. He was one of 2 people picked in the whole state of Montana to go to the Air Force Academy.
Wow.
Right. So this was a man who had the intellectual chops, the skills and memorization to do that, and then pass the bar in 2 states, and still he was like, this doesn't map to what I thought it was supposed to be. And he was super disillusioned by the American dream.
It's crazy. Well, go ahead, finish your I've got something to add in there when you're done.
Go right ahead. This is the time.
Well, it's interesting because I grew up in West Texas, nothing like the Bay, middle of the desert, West Texas, heavy Hispanic population, really good people out there. But my dad and mom and all their friends were my dad growing up in the church, but all his friends were like hippies that became Christians. And there was a thing called the Jesus People movement, and it started out close to where you're at. And they were baptizing thousands of people. My dad actually prayed for Lonnie Frisbee, which is the guy that looks like Jesus in that movie that they did about it. But they were Jesus people, so it was the Christian side of that. So when I was a kid, man, I remember my dad was in a band, and I remember sitting in the middle of all these guys. There was like 9 guys in his band. It was kind of like the Christian Eagles thing, It was great, and the music really was like sincerely top notch. And most of them were hippies that just became Christians. They were great players, and I just sitting there in the middle of that, and it gave me such a love for music. But then we also were involved at a church called Church of the Rock, and our band was that band. I mean, we had a band that went out and performed all over the Southwest and was incredible for our worship band. And the people actually loved each other, and there wasn't a whole lot of religious stuff. So early on, it gave me a real affection for that. But it's kind of like a twist on your story in the sense of that kind of hippie love thing. It was kind of a spinoff of that, if you will.
Well, it's interesting, I think, because when you actually unpack why people love music is because there's some kind of depth to it. And the word we can use to describe that depth is it's spiritual on a certain level. Now, whether that goes all the way into this idea of what we might call Christian music or faith music, right? It's powerful because the people in the band are experiencing a relationship with something greater than themselves.
Right.
It's not about their ego, right? Or the money. I mean, of course, everyone's got to make a living. But when you start to recognize that aspect about music, you start to be able to have that experience in ways that don't necessarily reflect what you think it might look like. Like one of the things that I had happen is I got to see Bob Marley and the Wailers live when I was 14
Oh,
years
wow.
old. And Bob Marley is a spiritual experience, especially back then, because he was selling out places, but it wasn't like he is today. He wasn't necessarily the global name he is today. And what came through is that man was devoted to his vision of God. And so the way music lived in his body and in his expression was, it was afterburners were on the whole way, right? It was like, I'm bringing it, right?
Yeah.
Which is another way to describe that is a kind of evangelical, right? It's bringing the spirit to the people, right? And when you imbue your life and your character with this kind of honoring of the divine, and you want everyone to be nourished by the thing that's nourishing you, it creates a lot more intensity behind it and a lot more fire. And the transmission then has that quality to it, and people pick up on that. And conversely, when you're just kind of going through the motions, or your relationship to it is money, people can pick up on that, and it doesn't have that nutrient, right? That flavor, right?
So definitely, like, the heart of music is very spiritual, you know. I mean, even biblically, it's very spiritual. You know, the angel of what is it? I may say this wrong, but like the angel of music is basically Lucifer, you know?
Really?
Yeah. So like he was supposed to be more musical. I don't know if that's all biblical. I'll have to look in that and get back to you, but
Be sure and write in, and Jeremy will send it to me.
But you know, music, David in the Bible was a musician. You know, there's musicians all through the Bible. So like to me it all ties together. But I agree with you. When somebody has a purpose in their music, you can hear it. You can hear it.
We can go outside of Christianity, and when you look at the music from India, which is in a completely different spiritual framework, it has this realness to it. It has this quality to it, because the people who are performing it have this lineage. They have this connection to their past, and this connection to the way that they put themselves in the music has a quality to it. They're not just throwing it off, and translates all across the globe. You can go to Japan and see Japanese traditional music, and all of these traditions, African.
What rock band do you see that has that the most? I'd be
interested. What rock band?
Yeah, what rock band do you really feel has almost a spiritual connection to everything?
Wow. I mean, so many, it's hard to pin it down. But I'll just say, like, I think that the Moody Blues represent a powerful version of that. And they're particularly interesting to me because, of course, they were British psychonauts, psychedelic pioneers, but they also were a very refined, orchestrated approach to how they do that, right? So, but then I also think that his career right after the Police, when he did the Dream of Blue Turtles, there was a kind of spiritual nature to him, but it's not from the place of faith and application of the Bible. It's from a different version, which is much more heady and logic based, and more like based on Jungian psychology. But the yearning that was in his heart, and his willingness to create complex compositions, you know, and reinvent himself, I think that's a spiritual journey. But I mean, right now, I mean, God, you know, if you told me that Creed was playing tomorrow, I've never been to a Creed concert, but I would go. Because they're I don't know if they're even still together, honestly.
They just went on tour again.
Right. So there's a thing that they do that's just super powerful. And, you know, if it was Foo Fighters and Creed and I had to pick, I'd go to the Foo Fighters. But they're not particularly spiritual, right? But there's a fire in their belly right?
I'll give you a song, and I think you'll agree this is highly spiritual, and it almost has to be because of the subject matter, and that's Tears in Heaven. That's one of the best spiritual examples where it's like, you know, it really is like you do hear like the love and the affection and the sadness for this child in that. And it's why it's such a delicate song all the way through, but it's just like bang, 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 hitting on your heart the whole way through. It's like that Sarah McLachlan song in that, what is it, Tears of Eyes of an Angel or something like
that one for
the
sure.
SPCA. That's probably like the most like banger type thing where it's like, it's nothing big. It's just light and they're killing you. You're crying. You want to go adopt a dog.
Yeah. The energy that hits the heart, right? And it hits it in a way that spreads throughout the body. And that's what great music does, is it enters through the chest. Mm-hmm. And from there, it blooms into the intelligence of it and the motivation of it. You know, even Marvin Gaye's Let's Get It On, right, which is much more sensual based. And I don't think that's going to be on any Christian's top 10 list, you know, not necessarily.
Yeah.
But
maybe in the bedroom.
That's how we get more humans, right? And to say that's not part of God's plan would be kind of a misunderstanding of God's plan, right? We got to get more humans somehow.
You know, my dad always said, if you're a Christian, just write music, and some of it'll maybe be quote unquote Christian music, but Christians have love in their life. They have sadness, they have joy, and so he wrote that way. And it was a great inspiration because luckily, you know, even though I was in the Christian band world in college and I played for 4 different bands, it was kind of a little accepted at that point because POD and a bunch of other bands, Jack 86, Disciple, like they were coming out and they were just doing it. And they had some stuff that had that. MXPX was a Christian band for those of you that don't know it. But it was a good time for that because there was kind of an alternate market for it, because that CCM stuff I've never liked. I don't really care for, you know, the music of Amy Grant and Michael W. Smith and all those guys. I want hard hitting music, man. I don't want cookie cutter. And a lot of music is so commercial, you know, and overproduced. And to me, the greatest musicians are the ones that sound great, whether they're hyper produced or not. And like Will Clark Jr., oh my God. I watched a video of him playing today. He's just laying back in his seat and he had his guitar up like this. And he's like, you know, just killing it and just looking. Just like that. I'm like, you're insane, man. He's just tearing it to pieces, man. That guy is incredible.
Nature. Playing is part of his nature. You know, another thing about music that I don't think people realize, that reggae is Christian music.
Well, it's Rastafarian. So,
well, but here's the thing. Like when you actually unpack what it means, the idea, the belief system behind it is the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, which is that Haile Selassie was a descendant of David and that they're the lost tribe. And so when you go through the history of reggae music and you understand all the biblical references that are in there,
it definitely is
open you up to a whole new world. It's not just about pot and Jah Rastafari. And what does Jah Rastafari mean? Like, there's definitely some convergence from the divergence.
I don't know the album, but POD put out an album and they referenced God as Jah, but it was directly to point the message at the reggae crowd, you know, but they are not Rastafarians that I know of. It was just a way of saying to the Jamaican crowd, the reggae crowd, God, you know. And so it's kind of like in the Bible where Paul talks about the unknown God kind of thing. And he's kind of using that to reference God himself. You know, it's kind of that. It was interesting. They didn't get a lot of love from some people, but, you know, look at them now. Who cares? They don't care.
Well, you know what he said? He said, when people are judging you and you're being persecuted, you're closer to me. Right? That's what Jesus said.
I definitely think, you know, in my faith, obviously I'm a believer, but I definitely would say people can be quite unfriendly or stereotype you because you are a believer, and that can be kind of rough sometimes. But what I always try to do, and this is just, you know, I always tell people, you know, my Bible teaches me to live a life of loving kindness like Jesus did, but I don't think you have to be a Christian to live a loving, kind life. I'm not telling people not to be, obviously. I would love everyone to be, but I'm just saying being loving and kind is something that will improve your life. I approach everything with love and kindness, at least try to, because it disarms people, it disarms situations, and it elevates the conversation.
Absolutely. And what happens when we are able to stop identifying with our quote unquote groups and be part of the human family is we start to see beyond the divisions and see beyond the man-made creations that separate us, because we tend to get lost in our own creations. We tend to, get sidetracked by our adherence to dogma and things that weren't meant to imprison us. They were actually meant to set us free. And so when we disidentify with the things that divide us from each other, we're actually doing the work of uniting us all together in harmony and, heading back towards Eden, heading in the right direction together. And it's fascinating to me because when you take something like Buddhism, my dad was a Catholic, my mom was a Buddhist. So that gives you a little bit of information.
A little yin
just
and
like you
yang
said,
there.
in kindness, right? Empathy. Those are really powerful Buddhist traits. Buddhism isn't a religion.
No.
Most people, right? It's a philosophy.
Right.
Right. And so I think that the more we discover about each other, the more we find how brilliant and bountiful this life is. Instead of fear and scarcity, we end up with a lot more humanity and a lot more abundance in terms of people finding out what we all really share the same desires at a certain deeper level. And so there's this opportunity to find common ground as opposed to division in the way that we explore these different things. And, I'm all for that because, that was one thing I learned in the late and early 70s was there's a way to look beyond the things that society sets up for us as things to judge each other about. And
that's right.
In that space, something amazing can happen, something really amazing. And when humanity gets itself together, we can solve incredible things. And when I look around the world today and I'm just like, oh my goodness, we have so much to share with each other. But so much of us are so caught up in the things that we're angry about or that we feel fear over. And I'm just not down with that because I know that that's not what I was put here for.
Right.
I don't need to be in a spiritual war. That's not for me, right? I am looking for the deconstruction of hatred and violence and the recognition that we're all God's children. And whatever vision of God you hold true to yourself, we're all in this together.
I had the blessing of working under a guy named Robert Alvarez at Big Commerce, and he was a visionary and really helped me get my arms around a lot of good ways to think in business. And one of them is he always encouraged us, and one of our things was to be ambitious, to be both humble and ambitious. And I've said this probably 10 times on the podcast, I know, but I think that's so important. And I would definitely say you're a good example of that, both ambition and that's kind of that free enterprise, that kind of killer, like gonna get out there and get stuff done, believe in myself and make it happen. It's kind of that, but doing it but I'm not really jack squat. I'm nothing. I need other people. I need to connect with others to make myself more powerful and effective. And that, to me, that ambitious life, that's the right attitude to have. And that dude's as chill as it's gets. And he's, I believe, IPO'd and exited several companies. He IPO'd Big Commerce, brilliant guy.
Yeah. I'm reminded of actually who I think the most spiritual rock band is.
Okay.
Carlos Santana's band.
Ooh, that's right.
Right. And I'm like, oh my God. Yeah. And it's a rock band, but it's a Latin rock band. And it's like this whole breadth of possibilities. And
I feel like our Latin friends are really tied into rhythm a lot of times really well too. And their music, other than Tejano, don't like Tejano. But man, I am just mesmerized. I had a buddy that studied classical guitar here in Austin. He played some Spanish guitar for us, and his fingers are, I'm like, it's beautiful. It's insane and rhythmic. And, yeah, I love Santana. Freddie's going to like that. You said that.
He's amazing. His notes are the kind of notes where when you hear that note, you know exactly who you're listening to, right? There's this thing that comes through, this transmission that comes through. And the way he speaks in concerts about reminding us to be, elevate ourselves and to find kindness and richness in the way that we are, exploring our life. To me, that's super powerful.
Well, and if you know anybody that knows Santana, or has met him, they will tell you the same. He's just a very kind, very nice guy.
But he's also fierce. Like that's the other side of him.
Yeah.
It's like there's a fierceness to him.
Yeah.
That's also part of that, but it's a benevolent fierceness. It's not a malevolent fierceness, right? He's not, right? And I remember when the Pope came to the San Francisco Bay Area, must have been 30 years ago. And a young man played guitar for him with his feet because he didn't have any hand. And I'm like, it's just this thing about music. It's like, you can't stop it.
Jeff Healy's, Jeff Healy was
blind.
He passed, but man, he could tear it up. There's a video with him. I'm trying to think. Stevie Ray. Oh my God. And Stevie Ray was blown away by him. He's sitting there with the guitar. I wish I had one of my guitars close. He's sitting there with it on his lap and just, making that face. He's blind, so he can't see, and he's just doing this and just playing with his hand upside down on top of and just, it was insane. Got to watch that video. I'll try to put it in the comments.
Great. And when we watch something like that, when we're in the room, they're opening a portal for all of us to connect to this higher aspect of ourselves, this part that recognizes joy and beauty and divinity and our commonality. And so I think that's part of why you and I mesh so well, is because we understand that the musical language is about personal liberation as well as collective liberation. And through that portal, we all find our way through the challenges of have this earthly existence.
Well, and I think the other part of it, too, is we both know that we have challenged life and our beliefs and our ideas, and we come together not because we share all the same ideas, but because we respect one another, and we we've held a lot of space for one another as well. So
that humility is so important, because if I'm so convinced of my ideas that there's no room for yours, there's something wrong.
Absolutely. Well, let's go ahead and finish this off. Marc, thank you for being my guest. This has been one of the best conversations. I always enjoy our conversations. I appreciate you. You are a very kind individual. I'm so glad you let me share you with my audience, and I look forward to seeing what you do from this point forward. And guys, if you need somebody that can help coach you towards success, you might want to talk to Marc. You can find him on LinkedIn and all that, but let you go ahead and plug anything that you might have to plug as well.
I will, but first I just want to say what a fierce, devoted heart you have. And I'm so grateful for the way that you look at things and what you're trying to bring with this podcast, which is the idea of bringing people into their own power to create outcomes for their families and for our culture and our life. That's top of the chop. So it's the feeling's mutual, Jeremy.
Thank you.
For sure. Yeah. And if you want to reach me, you can call me 415-7668. I'm happy to talk to you. You want to go to my website, you can go to marcwendtcoaching.com. Maybe there'll be a link in the show notes. I don't know.
Yeah, I'll put them in there.
There's a free call there. You just book it and we'll end up on Zoom. And, I'm happy to entertain the idea of us working together and having that be a process that involves payment. But I'm also devoted to being of service. So, don't be alone, folks. Don't think you're up against it. You can do this. We need each other. And part of my mission in life, the calling that I've answered, is to be there for people. And the keys are waiting right there. I just gave them to you. So come get me.
All right. Well, everybody, thank you so much. And Marc, it was great having you on. What a great conversation. I look forward to putting this one up. Thank you.
Yeah, let me know. I'll see you soon.